When a racist cop slapped an elderly black man in a packed courtroom, no one expected him to be the presiding judge, and the room went dead silent as their empire began to crumble in real time. Judge Harold Washington, 65, had seen enough injustice in his 4 decades on the bench to know when trouble was brewing. The silver-haired man moved through the Charleston courthouse with quiet dignity, his weathered hands carrying files that would decide the fate of yet another young life. At his age, most judges were considering retirement, but Harold wasn't done fighting. The morning air hung thick with tension as he approached courtroom 7. His arthritis flared slightly as he gripped the heavy oak door, but his resolve remained unshaken. Today's docket included a routine arraignment. A 17-year-old named Marcus Thompson charged with vandalism. What should have been a simple bond hearing felt different. Harold's instincts, honed by decades of reading people and situations, whispered warnings. "Morning, Judge Washington," called Sandra, the court clerk, her voice strained. "Officers Brady and Collins are already inside. They've been insistent about expediting the hearing." Harold paused. He knew that name, Detective Ray Brady, a man whose reports always seemed too clean, whose testimony never wavered, whose cases somehow avoided the scrutiny they deserved. Brady, mid-40s with dead eyes and a reputation for cutting corners, the kind of cop who believed his badge made him untouchable. The courthouse buzzed with its usual morning energy, lawyers shuffling papers, families waiting anxiously, reporters hunting for stories. None of them knew they were about to witness something that would shake Charleston's power structure to its core. Harold entered the courtroom quietly, not yet in his robes. He wanted to observe first, to understand the dynamics before taking the bench. The teenager sat with his overworked public defender, eyes wide with fear. Brady stood near the prosecution table, arms crossed, radiating authority and contempt. A young bailiff lingered by the wall, watching nervously. "Let's get this moving," Brady barked to no one in particular. "I don't have all day for some punk who thinks he can tag buildings in my district." Harold moved toward a side table to review the case file. In his simple white shirt and dark pants, without the black robe that announced his authority, he looked like any other courthouse employee. It was a mistake Brady and Collins would soon regret. The room held perhaps 20 people, a handful of attorneys, early arriving journalists, court staff, and family members, all witnesses to what was about to unfold. Harold had learned long ago that justice often happened in moments like these, when powerful men thought no one important was watching. As he reached for the file, Harold felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders. Somewhere behind him, Brady's voice grew sharper, more impatient. The storm was coming. Detective Brady's patience had evaporated completely. He'd been waiting 15 minutes for whoever was supposed to be running this circus, and his mood darkened with each passing second. The kid he'd arrested was nothing special. Just another street rat who thought he could disrespect property in Brady's neighborhood. But the system moved too slowly, gave these punks too many chances. "Hey," Brady called out, noticing the elderly black man at the side table. "You work here?" Harold continued reading the file, his expression neutral. The case details troubled him. The arrest report was thin, lacking crucial details. No witnesses listed, no photographs of the alleged vandalism, no statement from the property owner. It felt manufactured. "I said, hey." Brady's voice rose, drawing attention from across the room. "Old man, I'm talking to you." Harold looked up slowly, his dark eyes meeting Brady's with quiet authority. "I heard you." Something in that calm response ignited Brady's fury. In his world, people jumped when he spoke. They showed respect, showed fear. This old man just stood there, unfazed, as if Brady was nothing more than background noise. "You deaf or just disrespectful?" Brady stepped closer, his voice carrying the edge that had intimidated countless suspects. "When I ask you a question, you answer. Fast." Collins pushed off from the wall, sensing his partner's escalating anger. The room's energy shifted, conversation stopped, papers quit rustling, even the air conditioning seemed to pause. Harold remained motionless, file still in his hands. "I'm not required to answer your questions," Harold said evenly, "but I am interested in why your arrest report lacks basic documentation." Brady's face flushed red. "What did you just say to me?" The courtroom had gone completely silent now. Journalists slowly reached for their phones. Attorneys stopped mid-conversation. Even the teenager looked up from his huddle with the public defender. "You heard me," Harold replied, his voice carrying decades of authority that transcended any uniform or badge. Brady stepped forward, close enough that Harold could smell the coffee on his breath, see the vein pulsing in his temple. "Listen, Grandpa, I don't know who you think you are, but in here, I run things. That little punk over there is guilty, and I don't need some courthouse janitor questioning my work." Harold closed the file slowly, deliberately. "Courthouse janitor?" "Yeah, or whatever minimum wage job they got you doing. Now, move along before I decide you're interfering with police business." The trap was set. Brady's arrogance had blinded him completely. He had no idea he was about to assault the one person in that room with the power to destroy him. Harold Washington had faced down racist cops before, had endured decades of men who looked at his skin before they saw his position. But something about Brady's smirk, the casual cruelty in his voice, the assumption that age and race made Harold invisible, it crystallized every injustice he'd witnessed in his 40 years on the bench. "Officer Brady," Harold said quietly, "I suggest you reconsider your approach." "Or what?" Brady laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You gonna file a complaint? You gonna call your supervisor?" He looked around the room mockingly. "Maybe you don't understand how this works, old man. I'm the law in here." Collins shifted nervously, something in Harold's composure making him uneasy. But Brady was too far gone, drunk on his own power and the audience watching his dominance display. "Move," Brady commanded, pointing toward the gallery. "Sit down and shut up like a good boy." The words hung in the air like poison. Harold felt the familiar burn of humiliation, the same feeling he'd carried as a young lawyer fighting cases in this very courthouse when judges and prosecutors treated him like an unwelcome guest in his own profession. But this time was different. This time, he had the power to respond. "No," Harold said simply. Brady's hand moved before his brain caught up. The slap cracked through the courtroom like a gunshot, sharp, vicious, meant to break more than flesh. Harold's head snapped to the side, his glasses sliding down his nose. The red mark bloomed instantly across his dark cheek. The room erupted in gasps. Someone dropped papers. A woman whispered, "Oh my God!" Phones appeared like magic. Cameras rolling, witnesses to history in the making. Harold slowly straightened his glasses, his movements deliberate and controlled. He didn't touch his cheek, didn't step back, didn't show Brady the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, he looked directly into the detective's eyes with an expression that made Collins take an unconscious step backward. "Is that how you treat officers of the court, Detective Brady?" Harold asked, his voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Brady laughed again, but it sounded forced now, uncertain. "Officers of the court? You're a janitor, maybe a clerk. Don't get above yourself." Harold moved then, not away from Brady but toward the bench. Each step up the platform seemed to add weight to his presence. The room watched in stunned silence as he reached the judge's chair and turned to face them. "Actually," Harold said, his voice now carrying the full authority of his position, "I'm Judge Harold Washington, and you just assaulted a federal judge in open court." The silence that followed was deafening. The color drained from Brady's face like water from a broken dam. For the first time in his 20-year career, the detective found himself completely speechless, his mouth opening and closing without sound. The young bailiff took an unconscious step back, his hand instinctively moving away from his radio as if distance could somehow undo what they'd just witnessed. Judge Harold Washington settled into his chair with the quiet dignity of a man who had earned his place through decades of fighting for justice. He didn't need the black robe to command respect. His presence alone filled the courtroom with an authority that made everyone sit up straighter. "Bailiff Johnson," Harold called to the uniformed officer who had just entered, drawn by the commotion. "Please note for the record that Detective Brady has just committed assault on a sit-in federal judge in open court, witnessed by approximately 20 civilians and captured on multiple recording devices." Johnson, a veteran court officer who had worked with Judge Washington for 15 years, needed no further instruction. His hand moved to his radio as he approached Brady, whose complexion had gone from red to ash gray. "This isn't... I didn't know," Brady stammered, finally finding his voice. "You weren't wearing robes. You didn't identify yourself." "I shouldn't have to," Harold interrupted, his voice sharp as winter wind. "But more importantly, Detective, would it have mattered? Would you have struck me if I were white? Would you have ordered me to sit down like a good boy if my skin were a different color?" The questions hung in the air like accusations, and everyone in the room knew the answers. Journalists typed furiously on their phones. Attorneys whispered urgently to each other. The teenager, who had started this day facing vandalism charges, now watched his arresting officer face something far more serious. "Your Honor," the young bailiff finally spoke, his voice cracking slightly. "Should I contact Internal Affairs?" Harold's gaze shifted to the young officer, appreciating his professionalism in this chaotic moment. "Please do. Also, contact the FBI. This is now a federal matter involving assault on a federal judge." Brady tried one more desperate gambit. "I've served this city for 20 years. I've put criminals behind bars. I've risked my life. And you've just thrown it all away," Harold finished quietly, "because you couldn't see past the color of my skin to recognize that justice doesn't wear a uniform. It wears a robe. And today, Detective Brady, justice is watching you." The trap had sprung completely. There was no escape, no higher authority to appeal to, no way to make this disappear. Within 30 minutes, the courthouse had transformed into a crime scene. Internal Affairs investigators arrived with briefcases and grim expressions. FBI agents followed, their presence elevating the assault from local misconduct to federal investigation. The media had caught wind of the story, and news vans lined the street like predatory birds. Judge Washington remained on the bench, no longer presiding over a simple arraignment, but orchestrating the systematic dismantling of corruption. He had called for his court reporter to document every word, every admission, every revelation that was about to pour forth. "Detective Brady," Harold said, his voice carrying the weight of a final judgment, "in my 40 years on this bench, I have witnessed many forms of misconduct, but rarely have I seen such blatant disregard for the law from those sworn to uphold it." Agent Sarah Martinez from the FBI's Civil Rights Division approached the bench. "Your Honor, we'd like to take Detective Brady into custody pending a full investigation. We also have reason to believe this incident may be part of a larger pattern." Brady's eyes darted frantically around the room, looking for allies, for escape routes, for anything that might save him. But his fellow officers had distanced themselves, the prosecutors avoided eye contact, and even Collins had stepped away as if Brady were radioactive. "A larger pattern?" Harold inquired, though he suspected he knew the answer. "Yes, sir. Detective Brady's arrest records show a disproportionate number of charges against young black males, many with insufficient evidence. We've also identified at least 12 complaints of excessive force that were mysteriously dismissed or lost in the system." The young bailiff, who had witnessed everything, nodded grimly. "I've seen some of those cases come through this courtroom, Your Honor. Always seemed convenient how the evidence lined up." "Interesting," Harold mused. "So this isn't just about one rogue detective." He turned to the court reporter. "Please note that we now have testimony suggesting a pattern of misconduct spanning multiple cases." The teenager, Marcus Thompson, watched this unfold with growing understanding. The vandalism charge against him was beginning to look like another piece of a pattern. Young black men arrested on thin evidence, processed through a system designed to fail them. "Your Honor," Marcus's public defender stood, finding her voice. "In light of these revelations, I move to dismiss all charges against my client and request an investigation into the circumstances of his arrest." Harold nodded slowly. "Motion granted. Furthermore, I'm ordering a review of every case involving Detective Brady for the past 5 years. If there's a pattern of false arrests and manufactured evidence, we're going to expose every single instance." Brady finally found his voice again. "You're destroying my career over a misunderstanding." "No, Detective," Harold replied coldly. "I'm exposing the truth. Your career destroyed itself." As the investigation deepened, the true scope of corruption began to emerge like a cancer exposed to light. Agent Martinez spread files across a conference table in Judge Washington's chambers, each folder representing another thread in a web of systematic abuse that stretched far beyond 2 rogue cops. "Judge Washington," Martinez began, "what we've uncovered in just 4 hours is staggering. Detective Brady wasn't working alone. He had protection, coordination, and what appears to be official sanction for his activities." Harold leaned back in his chair, his face grave. At 65, he had hoped his final years on the bench would be spent on routine cases, mentoring younger judges, perhaps writing his memoirs. Instead, he found himself at the center of the largest corruption investigation in Charleston's recent history. "Show me," he said simply. Martinez opened the first folder. "Captain Robert Lawson, Brady's direct supervisor. Over the past 3 years, he personally dismissed or buried 23 complaints against Brady. Each time, he cited insufficient evidence or complainant credibility issues." The second folder revealed Prosecutor David Chen, who had maintained an unusually high conviction rate by accepting Brady's arrests without question, rarely challenging evidence and consistently recommending harsh sentences for Brady's defendants. "Here's where it gets interesting," Martinez continued, opening a third file. "City Councilman Michael Torres received significant campaign contributions from the Police Benevolent Association. In return, he blocked 3 separate proposals for police oversight committees and helped secure budget increases that included substantial overtime for Brady's unit." Harold felt a familiar anger building. Not the hot rage of the courtroom slap, but the cold fury of a man who had dedicated his life to justice only to see it corrupted by greed and racism. "How many victims?" he asked quietly. "Conservatively, over 150 young men, mostly black and Latino, arrested on questionable charges over the past 5 years. Many took plea deals rather than fight charges they couldn't afford to contest. Some are still in prison." The weight of those numbers settled over the room like a shroud. 150 lives derailed, families destroyed, futures stolen, all to feed a machine that turned human suffering into career advancement and political power. And the evidence? Audio recordings, financial records, email communications. Captain Lawson was sloppy. He kept digital records of everything, apparently thinking he was untouchable. Prosecutor Chen left a paper trail of communications with Brady that show clear coordination. As for Councilman Torres, Martinez smiled grimly. He made the mistake of bragging about his police partnerships in recorded city council sessions. Harold stood and walked to his window, looking out at the city he had served for 4 decades. How do we proceed? Carefully, Martinez replied. These people have resources, connections. They're going to fight back. Harold's reflection in the window showed a man ready for war. Let them try. The retaliation began before Judge Washington reached his car that evening. His phone buzzed with messages from unknown numbers, some threatening, others offering mysterious solutions to his problem. The shadow war had begun, and Harold found himself in the crosshairs of a machine designed to protect itself at any cost. Judge Washington, came a smooth voice as he reached his vehicle. A man in an expensive suit emerged from a black sedan. Tall, well-groomed, with the kind of confidence that came from knowing which palms to grease and which threats to make. I don't believe we've been introduced, Harold replied, his hand moving instinctively toward his phone. Richard Blackwood, attorney for the Police Benevolent Association. I represent Detective Brady's interests, and I'm here to discuss a resolution that serves everyone's best interests. Harold studied the man carefully. Blackwood had the look of someone who had never lost a case he truly wanted to win. Someone who understood that power came in many forms: money, connections, and the willingness to use both without mercy. I'm listening, Harold said, though every instinct told him to walk away. Detective Brady made a mistake. A human error in a stressful situation. He didn't recognize you, reacted poorly, and now he's paying the price. But taking this further serves no one. Brady loses his career, the department faces unnecessary scrutiny, and you become a target for forces much larger than yourself. The threat was wrapped in silk, but it was unmistakably a threat. Harold had faced down such men before, though rarely with stakes this high. Are you suggesting I drop the charges? Blackwood smiled, a predator recognizing another predator. I'm suggesting that a man of your wisdom understands the difference between justice and revenge. Brady can retire quietly, receive counseling, perhaps do some community service. The department can implement new training protocols. Everyone wins. Except the 200 young men whose lives Brady and his network destroyed. Blackwood's smile faltered slightly. I see Agent Martinez has been busy. Judge Washington, those cases were handled according to proper procedures. Any irregularities were administrative errors, not criminal conspiracy. Harold felt the familiar fire building in his chest. Administrative errors? Is that what you call ruining innocent lives? I call it the price of maintaining order in a complex society. Sometimes mistakes happen. The question is whether those mistakes should destroy dedicated public servants who've given their lives to protect this community. No, Harold said firmly. The question is whether the law applies equally to everyone, regardless of their badge or their connections. And, Mr. Blackwood, I've spent 40 years ensuring that it does. Blackwood's facade dropped completely. You're making a serious mistake, Judge. There are consequences for disrupting established systems. Then let's find out what they are. By the following morning, the courthouse slap had become national news. Video footage from multiple angles flooded social media, news networks ran continuous coverage, and hashtag Justice for Judge Washington began trending worldwide. Harold arrived at the courthouse to find crowds of supporters, protesters, and media creating a circus that transformed the building's steps into a battlefield of public opinion. Judge Washington, Judge Washington. Reporters thrust microphones toward him as he made his way through the crowd. How do you respond to Detective Brady's claim that this is all a misunderstanding? Harold paused, looking out at the sea of faces. Some angry, some hopeful, all watching to see what kind of man he truly was. Behind the police barriers, he could see families holding pictures of young men, women with signs reading, "My son, too," and "Justice delayed is justice denied." I respond by saying that the video speaks for itself, Harold said clearly, but this isn't about one slap or one bad cop. This is about a system that allows such behavior to flourish unchecked. What about reports that you're part of an activist agenda to defund the police? Shouted another reporter. Harold's eyes flashed. I'm part of an agenda that believes in equal justice under law. If that's activism, then every judge in America should be an activist. Inside the courthouse, Agent Martinez waited with updates that would change everything. Judge Washington, we've made arrests. Captain Lawson, Prosecutor Chen, and 2 other supervisors are in federal custody. We've also frozen assets belonging to Councilman Torres, pending investigation of campaign finance violations. Harold felt a grim satisfaction, but also a deep sadness. Each arrest represented not just justice, but the betrayal of oaths sworn to protect and serve. What about Brady? Still cooperating. He's naming names, providing evidence. Apparently, the network was even larger than we thought. We've identified connections to 2 other precincts, possibly more jurisdictions. Through his window, Harold could see the crowd growing larger. News vans from every major network lined the street. Social media had amplified the story beyond Charleston, beyond South Carolina, into a national conversation about police accountability and judicial courage. His phone buzzed. A text from his granddaughter in college. Grandpa, you're my hero. The whole campus is talking about what you did. Finally, someone with power who fights back. Harold smiled for the first time in days. Maybe this was why he'd stayed on the bench longer than most, why he'd endured 4 decades of fighting for justice in a system often designed to prevent it. Not for the headlines or the history books, but for moments like this, when truth finally had enough power to fight back. The storm was far from over, but for the first time, Harold felt like they might actually win. 3 weeks later, Harold Washington sat in his chambers, surrounded by boxes of evidence that painted a picture of corruption spanning decades. The investigation had grown beyond anyone's imagination. What began with a courtroom slap had exposed a network that reached into City Hall, the prosecutor's office, and police departments across 3 states. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in." Richard Blackwood entered, but this time he looked different. Less polished, more desperate. The man who had threatened Harold weeks ago now carried himself like someone whose world was collapsing. "Judge Washington, I think we need to talk." "I think that ship has sailed, Mr. Blackwood." Blackwood sat down uninvited, his expensive suit wrinkled, his confidence shattered. "Do you have any idea what you've unleashed? Brady was small time. The real players, the ones you're going after now, they don't negotiate, they don't make deals, they eliminate problems." Harold studied the lawyer carefully. "Is that a threat?" "It's a warning, from someone who's finally realized he's been playing in a game much bigger than he understood." Blackwood pulled out a thick folder. "This is everything I know about the network Brady was part of. Names, dates, financial records, recorded conversations. Consider it my resignation from representing people I should have investigated instead of protected." Harold opened the folder, his eyes widening as he scanned the contents. The corruption wasn't just local, it was systematic, coordinated, involving officials at state and federal levels. "Why now?" Harold asked. "Yesterday they told me to make you disappear permanently. And despite everything I've done, everything I've compromised, I'm not a killer." Blackwood's voice broke slightly. "I've spent my career protecting corrupt cops, burying evidence, destroying lives. But you? When I saw that video of Brady hitting you, when I saw how you stood up, I remembered why I became a lawyer in the first place." Harold closed the folder, feeling its weight, not just physically, but morally. "What happens to you now?" "I'll probably go to prison. My career is over. My family?" Blackwood shrugged. "At least I'll be able to look at myself in the mirror again." Outside, Harold could hear the sounds of the courthouse winding down for the day. In 3 weeks, he had gone from an elderly judge facing a routine arraignment to the center of the largest corruption investigation in the state's history. "Mr. Blackwood," Harold said finally, "justice isn't just about punishment. It's about redemption, too. What you're doing now, that matters." Blackwood nodded, stood, and walked toward the door. At the threshold, he turned back. "Judge Washington? That young man, Marcus Thompson, he's going to graduate valedictorian next month. Apparently, watching you stand up for yourself inspired him to believe he could achieve anything." Harold smiled. That made it all worthwhile. 6 months after the slap heard round the world, Judge Harold Washington stood before a packed auditorium at Charleston Law School, delivering what many considered the most important speech of his career. At 60, he had decided to retire, not in defeat, but in victory, having dismantled a corruption network that had operated with impunity for decades. "When Detective Brady struck me that morning," Harold began, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "he thought he was putting an old black man in his place. What he actually did was expose a cancer that had been eating away at our justice system for years." The audience, law students, attorneys, judges, and citizens, listened with rapt attention. In the front row sat Marcus Thompson, now a college-bound senior who credited Judge Washington with changing his life's trajectory. "The final tally," Harold continued, "was more than we ever imagined. 8 police officers indicted, 3 prosecutors removed from office, 2 city council members convicted of corruption, over 180 wrongful convictions overturned, more than $35 million in settlements paid to victims of police misconduct." But Harold knew the numbers only told part of the story. The real victory was harder to quantify. The young men who now believed the system could work for them. The police officers who understood they weren't above the law. The prosecutors who thought twice before rubber-stamping questionable arrests. "Some people ask me if I have any regrets," Harold said, his eyes finding familiar faces in the crowd. "The truth is, I regret that it took a slap to wake us up. I regret that we allowed this corruption to flourish for so long. I regret every young person who suffered because we, all of us, failed to hold power accountable." He paused, letting the weight of those words settle over the room. "But I don't regret fighting back. I don't regret standing up when it would have been easier to stay quiet. And I don't regret spending my final months on the bench proving that justice isn't just an ideal. It's a choice we make every day." The standing ovation lasted 5 full minutes. As Harold looked out at the crowd, he saw something that made his heart swell. Hope. Real, tangible hope that the system could change, that accountability was possible, that one person standing up for what's right could inspire thousands to do the same. Later, as he packed up his chambers for the final time, Harold found a letter on his desk. It was from a young police officer named Sarah Martinez, not the FBI agent, but a rookie cop inspired by his example to become the change she wanted to see in law enforcement. "Judge Washington," the letter read, "thank you for showing us that justice isn't about the robe or the badge. It's about the courage to do what's right, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Harold smiled, placed the letter in his briefcase, and walked out of the courthouse with his head held high.